So Apple launched the new M4 MacBook Pros. This is their 14-inch model, and it's equipped with the M4 Max, their top-end configuration, and it also has their new nano texture on their screen. It's a texture that's designed to cut down reflections. It's the first time they've actually had it on one of their laptops. But I want to do a quick video here that kind of goes over the important things that I think you should be aware of when it comes to this device. And the first thing I want to talk about is performance. The CPU gains are quite good year on year, but it's particularly impressive that the M4 Max can outperform the M2 Ultra in a lot of benchmarks and workflows. And in terms of graphics, the GPU gains on the M4 Pro are decent, but the GPU gains on the M4 Max are very impressive. Most GPU-bound apps and games will get a nice bump up from this, plus the ray tracing capabilities are better, so apps and games can take advantage of that. The thing I'm most impressed by, though, is how good the M4 Max GPU is compared to the previous generation, especially at a very similar thermal envelope. Like if you think about the competitors in this space, like AMD, NVIDIA, when they come out with laptop GPUs, typically the new models also come with like an increase in power requirement, right? It's just like, 5 or 10 watts per year, but it adds up over the course of time. And on this device, if you think about the M1 Max to the M4 Max, the GPU has improved so much with very little increase in power consumption. The thermals on this device are pretty much the same as last year's models. Now, in terms of memory, the base configurations start at 16 gigabytes now, thankfully, and they've also increased the memory bandwidth. It's noticeable already on the base models, but the Pro and Max chips get a significant boost in memory speed. So for applications that lean on fast memory, you definitely notice a bump up this year. If I'm being honest though, it's difficult for me to tell how much of the gains that we're seeing this year come from the memory speed increase versus the CPU or the GPU increase. Like they're all tied together, and I don't have the tools to lock memory speed on a MacBook, so it's tough to tell. I will say though that if you have an older M1 or M2 or M3 MacBook Pro, I wouldn't upgrade because Apple's silicon performance progresses so fast year on year that it can pay off to just wait as long as you can before you buy new hardware. Okay, let's talk about the screen. So this particular device is running their new nano texture finish, and it's finish we've seen on other devices before, right? Like their screens, the new iPads, and every time I've ever talked about that texture in a video, like a review video, I've been like, it's nice, but it's not all that special, at least not to me. But check this out. So on the laptop, the one on the left, that is the nano texture. This is a regular, like the glossy finish. And I have an overhead light. Do you see the difference in the reflection? And it's not just like a diffusion. It's a pretty distinct reduction in just light emittance. And I think, okay, when it came to the regular screens and the iPad, I even said this in my review of that, like it's a nice feature for some people, but for me, I would never get it. But for whatever reason, on the laptop, I looked at this, I'm like, this is awesome. I totally would get this if I was buying this year's device. And I think it's because on a laptop, your face tends to be a little bit closer to the screen because we're just like, that's how we use the laptops. Versus a desktop, you tend to be a little bit further away from the screen. And because it's a little bit closer, I just find that the reflections that are being muted by this finish are, like, it just seems to have more impact. There's just more value to that feature. So it's a $150 option, and it's also not like a coating or some kind of layer that they put on top. It's part of the glass. It's like a treatment for the glass. They etch it with some kind of acid, and it just does this to the glass. And supposedly it doesn't affect the durability or like fragility of it, but we'll have to see. The other new feature for the screens this year is that they now get brighter. These now are able to hit 1,000 nits at the top end, but in order to get it, you have to be in a really bright environment for that detector to be like, okay, you need that extra brightness. It's a nice feature add, but I wouldn't be buying a new device just for that brighter screen. And also there's apps like Better Display that crank up the brightness of your screen, like beyond the stock levels, if that's something that you really need. Okay, ports. So the number of USB-C ports has increased on the base model from 2 to 3. So last year's M3 MacBook Pro at the base only had these 2 USB-C ports on the left, and then on the right, there was no third USB-C port. But now all of the MacBook Pros, the M4 devices, all have 3 USB-C ports. Now on the base M4, it is still just Thunderbolt 4, and then on the M4 Pro and M4 Max chips, they're Thunderbolt 5. Now, I've said this in previous videos, but Thunderbolt 5 is not particularly useful for most people in terms of like having faster storage because Thunderbolt 3 and 4 are plenty fast for that. But Thunderbolt 5 enables higher resolution displays because of that extra bandwidth, if that's important to you. The battery life is supposed to be longer lasting this generation. The battery size stays the same, but for my testing, I didn't see too much of a gain with heavy workflows on the 14-inch model, but for lighter tasks, it was definitely a little bit longer lasting. The webcam is improved over the previous generation. The M4 MacBook Pros are now running a 12 megapixel sensor, and this, because of the higher resolution, enables center stage. So as you move around, it'll kind of track your face and do the stuff we've seen on like iPads and iMacs. It's a neat feature, and I do think that the image quality is better, but it's very slight. Like, this is still a very thin panel on the screen, so you can't put like huge sensors or huge optics in that webcam area. Okay, the other thing that's changed for this year is they've gotten rid of the space gray coloration, which is, I think, a huge shame. This is the space black. It's not like a new color, but they don't have space gray anymore. It's the only dark colored MacBook Pro they have. But otherwise, it's a nice bump. I think the performance this year is much more impressive than I thought it would be, particularly on the GPU component. But yeah, there you have it. That's the new M4 MacBook Pros.